Apostle Paul himself gives us the summary of what his practice was when he preached the gospel. Acts 20, you have a look, there are two verses there in Acts 20 where, first of all, Paul says he's preaching the gospel of the grace of God. And then a couple of verses later, he again says the same thing, but he changes his phrase a little bit with an equivalent phrase where he says he's preaching the gospel of the kingdom. So to preach the gospel of Christ's kingdom is to preach the grace of God that's coming to us. Now, of course, the Apostle Paul tells us, in 1 Corinthians 15, that he wants to remind the Corinthian believers there about the things which he considers were amongst the things of first importance. And he goes on to talk about how Christ was crucified for our sins according to the Scriptures. He was buried, and he was raised again according to the Scriptures on the third day. So Paul puts as most of Christendom talks about the gospel as only the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Christ. Critical. Paul says these are things of first priority and first importance, but they're among the things of first importance. And so the death and the burial and the resurrection, in other words, the redemptive work of Christ is that which guarantees the kingdom is for us. And through the gospel, Paul says to Timothy that through the gospel, God has brought to light the life and the immortality that comes to us through the gospel. So it's the gospel, the saving and redemptive, key that guarantees the grace of God is coming to us in the kingdom. That's not as clear as I said to you over the coffee, but you get the idea. We're not saying that Christ's death on the cross is not important or not central. What we are saying is it guarantees our entrance into the kingdom, because under the new covenant, God says, your iniquities and sins I remember no more. They're forgiven. It's guaranteed. And the resurrection, Christ being the first man raised to immortality, is the guarantee that we shall, as he's the first fruits, we are the harvest that will follow. And so therefore our resurrection is guaranteed because Christ has laid the foundation through his death, burial and resurrection.
Greg is actually right. Acts 20 verses 24 and 25 is the very next verse, solves all problems. I came and preached to you the gospel of the grace of God, Acts 20:24, and the very next verse says, and as I went about heralding, heralding the kingdom. It's the same thing. But I've heard evangelical preachers stop at verse 24. One of you here could have a complete ministry to the world, to the evangelical world, on that point. It's the same thing. The other part would be, if Caesar's about to chop your head off, you don't want to use that word kingdom too much, and he doesn't in his letters, although he knows about so-and-so, various conduct will not enter the kingdom. He knows about that. But he uses the word righteousness of God, do the same thing. Sometimes the righteousness of God coming.
Interchangeable.
Yes, really, the same idea. There's a lot of code in the New Testament, especially if you're a bit scared of Caesar. You don't provoke Caesar by talking about kingdom all the time. But Greg answered exactly right. You accept the book of Acts as true. So we know from Acts that Paul preached the kingdom, Acts 28, to Jews and Gentiles. And that is the question you asked. I love that question. And that's the answer. Acts 20, verses 24, 25. We didn't have time to do the 8 kingdom texts in Acts, but you all know them. Acts 1:3, 1:6, 8:12, 14:22, 19:8, and then 28, verses 23 and 31. That's what you do across the kitchen table, to show exactly, because the devil's trying to pull Jesus away from Paul. One of our presidents said Paul was the first corrupter of Christianity. But he believed in the one God. Be careful. Believing in the one God by itself doesn't get you home. You can be horribly wrong in areas. Paul was continuously preaching the gospel of the kingdom. Every time you say gospel, the rest of your life, always say the gospel of the kingdom, because your friends don't know that.